All right. True crime and media was the scholarly article that I decided to pick to present to everybody in this class, and I hope you like it. I've read this article for two different classes, and it's very insightful. So there will be a link in my references if you guys want to check it out and read it. It's very good. I highly recommend it because it's very interesting. Now, some key points that I want to discuss. What is true crime? When you think about true crime, what do you think it is? Where do you think these podcasts come from? Um, and then for the article, what was the purpose of this study? What is the theory? Methods that they use, results, and furthermore, conclusion. Okay, as you can see in these two pictures, these are just a minimum, small examples of what podcasts, what docuseries, possibly even books that you could look further into seeing it. True Crime Network has phenomenal different stories. Unsolved Mysteries is older. I grew up watching that. I'm a lot older than you guys, so I mean, you guys might not know what that is, but it was very popular in the 70s, and Netflix even rebooted it in 2003 and brought it back after the notorious Robert Stack passed away. So now, when you think of podcasts, this article focused on explaining what podcasts are. There is over 250,000 different podcasts that are available from Apple or even Android that you could possibly download to your streaming device. That is phenomenal possibilities, everybody. Inmates in prison have been proven beyond a reasonable doubt that they killed this person or they engaged in this type of true crime media, shall I say, and they still feel that they didn't commit it, that they were framed, or whatever their excuse might be. Now, media has capitalized on this by making docuseries, podcasts, or even books, TV shows, whatever they might do to explain that this person is innocent, that they did not commit this crime, when in reality they did. So even if they know they did it, they're gonna capitalize on it and make a show out of it to get as many views as they can. HBO has many different mini series. I call them docu-series because it's a documentary that has like 10 episodes to it. So I mean, whatever they want to call it. Making a Murderer was one that was referenced. Jinx, I'm not quite sure what that is, but it's probably a docu-series. Now, the theory that this article focused on was uses and gratification theory, which is what media did they engage with and did they listen to, and it brought them satisfaction by their own needs and wants. So whether it be the internet, your cell phone, radio, even social media, YouTube, whatever your cup of tea is that you enjoy listening to, you can find this material on that. TikTok, anything. Now, the purpose of this study was the authors Boling and Hall wanted to see what type of audience and what type of genre that the podcast listeners listen to and how that audience compares to podcasts with other true crime media. They studied individual motivators, why they listened to the true crime, how it impacted the criminal justice, and even new incoming cases. How do producers use this podcast media to encourage media interaction? So many podcasts, even morbid, how to make a murderer or whatever it might be. Wow, they'll have like a guest speaker on the show, and it'll be like an ongoing case, and they'll explain like the key evidence and what they have so far, even though they haven't prosecuted. So it's kind of like an update, shall you say, of what they're investigating. And then you can just find older ones that they have been prosecuted, and it's just telling their story. Now, in 2001, when the iPad, I want to say iPad, I'm sorry, the iPod was released, Apple wanted to make podcasts for the iPod, but it didn't get really popular until like 10 years later. So it's still pretty recent. Dave Weiner introduced the Rich Site Summary, which is an RSS, which is a digital audio file that is used to distribute feeds. So imagine subscribing to your favorite podcast. And when you select download, it's going to automatically take that digital file and upload it to your phone or whatever streaming device that you are going to be listening to the file on. And it's every time a new episode pops out, it's going to automatically download it to your device, and it's going to ping and say, alert, alert, you have a new episode. It's going to notify you. So if it's a newer series, once you subscribe to that podcast, every time a new one comes out, it's just going to automatically download it to your streaming device. Why does it do this? Just to get as many views as it can. Like I said, podcast is a digital file or series of files that's going to be downloaded via the internet. And here are some good examples of you as a person is going to subscribe to that RS feed, and then it's going to download it to whatever the file is going to be. All right, sorry about that. So whatever the file is going to be, it's going to just download it automatically to whatever you choose. So active podcast audience. So there's 3 dimensions: interactivity, which is the ability to choose what, when, where you want to engage with the media. Concept of demassification. So you as a user are going to decide what aspects of the media you want to engage with. So example, you as a user are deciding what podcasts you want to listen to. A simple quantity is allowing and sending and receiving those messages to you as a user. So example, the podcast is going to be readily available to you as the audience whenever you want it to be available to you. So what is the argument? How do the audience engage with true crime? How do they feel after they engage? What pleasure does it give them? Why do they continue to listen to true crime? How does this make them feel afterwards? These are all arguments that the researcher wanted to further investigate. So the research questions was question 1 through 4. What motivators did that person have to engage in the true crime? And did it correlate with their age or their gender? Question 2, are true crime podcast users likely to engage in other true crime media? Are true crime podcast users likely to go beyond listening to the true crime? So did they contact the distributor and say, hey, I liked your show. Hey, they get on Reddit and then they read on the forums to decide if they want to further discuss that topic that they had just got done listening to. Question 4, are true crime podcast users likely to be heavy consumers of podcast media? So the methods was they conducted an instrument used survey. They gathered quantitative data. They used short scale, which was a scale with fewer than 10 items. The Likert type scale. These were all different methods that they used. So like on a ratio of 1 to 5, how did it make you feel? It made you feel angry, or it made you feel pleasure, or you agree with the question, you somewhat agree, you disagree. Like it was just like different numbers of what they decided was appropriate. So results. Um, Research question 1 explored what was the podcast motivators and their interrelationship reflected. So based on the gender and age, the motivational scale discovered that entertainment and convenience was the item that the podcast users were more likely to agree with, the statement said. Motivator statements discovered that podcasts are free and easy to use. That's why they engaged with the true crime. Boredom came in next, and men and women watched the podcast because they had nothing better to do. So it was basically a guilty pleasure of theirs that they used to kill time, whether if it was them cooking dinner, driving to work, on break from work, on break from school. Like these were all different key factors of what they wanted to engage with. All right, research question 2. So they examined the likelihood that true crime users would be consumers of other media. Results show no significance that other forms of media was used and that they were heavy true crime podcast listeners. Research question 3 was they examined the likelihood that they will go beyond listening, engage in online discussions, communicate with the host, or do more research on that case that they just listened to. The results show that when they discuss the podcast with others, they prefer to do it like in person. So like, and it was more likely in like women. Men don't really say, "Hey, I listened to this podcast. What do you think about it?" But it was women that were more engaging in communicating with the host, posting posts on the online forum, Reddit. They would go like they had those options, but they rather go to a coffee shop with their girlfriend and say, "Hey, I listened to this. Did you listen to it?" And they're like, "Yeah, I did." And then they basically kept notes with each other. So 63% of these respondents reported that they do, like I just said, Reddit. They do engage in online forums, but only 47% reported that they do it with Reddit. Research question 4. It examined the use of podcast media by true crime. The results showed that 63% of these respondents listened to true crime for 5 or more hours or longer a week. 28% revealed that they listened to true crime podcasts 10 hours or more a week. There was no significance that showed males were listening to true crime podcasts more than females. However, there was no significance between the amount of time spent listening to the true crime. I'm just going to stop the video. All right. Now, for the discussion, female respondents were, like I said, more likely to agree with statements such as listening to true crime podcasts educates me about the criminal justice system. And I listen to true crime podcasts so I can learn more about what could happen to me. In the first statement, it showed no significance between the genders. However, in the second statement, it didn't show any significance between the genders. So both those two questions were asked, but it didn't show that men are more likely to do it versus women are more likely to do it. This study, however, did find that gender and age impacted the motivators for listening to the true crime, but women were more likely than men to listen to types of podcasts for social interaction to escape and their voyeuristic tendencies. The findings between male and female motivators show no significance between the genders, nor no correlation between age and the motivators for relaxation, arousal, boredom, and convenience. Women were found to be engaged in the online community more than men, and that they visit the online discussion but don't participate. Men spend more time listening to the podcast, but males and females spend the same amount of time listening to true crime podcasts. This study reviewed other forms of media besides true crime and found that podcasts are the favorite media form of true crime. And then books and movies fall like next. And I think that's because a podcast is more easier to engage with because you're going to have it already on your cell phone. You can plug your ear pods in and listen to it wherever you're going. Like I said earlier in a previous slide, while you're cooking dinner, while you're just relaxing on your couch, while you're just, anytime you have like a little gap in time, like a break, you can be listening to it. So that's why it's more favorable rather than a book and a movie. You have to take time to read it. And then a movie, you have to be at home, or your break's not really going to be long enough to engage in the whole movie. Now, for future research, many of the respondents followed true crime on Reddit, and it skewed younger individuals in age and higher in online involvement. So future studies should involve the entire true crime podcast audience, making sure to engage in both older and non-online audience members. And in the survey, the people that they were asking the questions to were like on the online forums or they were on Reddit. So it was such a small audience. Yeah, it had 150 respondents that were answering the questions, but it was on specific sites of true crime. So it was saying that maybe in the future they could have different ages of from teenagers to mid adults to older adults to seniors, like have a more broad age of podcast listeners. And they could even ask the same questions with like non true crime podcasts. And more open ended surveys or focus groups with listeners to gain a deeper understanding of why true crime podcast listeners enjoy this type of media. Conclusion: true crime podcast hosts allow different forums to engage with their listeners. Like I said, throughout this PowerPoint, they have like Morbid has a website that the person can listen to the story and then they can engage with. You could even write a letter, but I mean, who's going to do that? So you can go on their website and they're going to post the court documents, the case files, photos of evidence, people that are related to that crime, their key witnesses, the interviews they did, like all that stuff is apparently made public. So that way it's easier for these podcast listeners to gain access to it. And like I said, in the study, they were going on these websites and they were commenting on it and telling like how they felt while they listened to the podcast. And results by doing this forms that involvement that the listeners are having that online fan base. And this creates a female active and involved audience. Yes, men listen to it, but women are more commonly involved with true crime podcasts. And this is the reference. Boling and Hall, undisclosed information. Sarah is my favorite murderer, which is it's a podcast. Examining motivations in the true crime podcast audience. And then here is the permalink that you could click on, and it'll take you right to my this journal article. So if you guys want to read it, I highly recommend that you do because it was very, very interesting. And I hope you all enjoyed this PowerPoint, and I hope I didn't sound too broken and too nervous about it. So feel free to comment and tell me what I could have done better, what criteria would have made it more interesting, if you had any issues with it, any recommendations, just comment on the forum that we're going to be engaging with next week. And thank you, everybody.